about my experiences, but actually, yeah, in this presentation, I will share our project experiences with Headless, with Sitecore Headless from the past, actually from the past year. And a little bit about me. I am Tamás Tárnok, a software architect at ALLWIN, and I am a 5-time Sitecore Technology MVP. And yeah, I was working on various Sitecore projects, but actually last year we got our first one. So it was a nice journey to get there from nothing to production. So I will share those experiences. And here is my Twitter and my blog, and with the same name, you can also reach out on Slack. So let's dive into the topic. Let's have a look at the agenda. First, in the first 3 sections, we just have a look at the different angle of the Sitecore Headless. So first, we just discuss what Headless means actually, and then go to the Sitecore Headless services. This is actually the backend of the Headless part in Sitecore, and the third point is about the Sitecore Next.js SDK. So what basically Next.js is, and also how Sitecore is integrated with that. And the last part is really the story from the beginning to the end of our first Sitecore Headless project, and I will share some experiences, what we experienced through the journey. So let's start with the Headless CMS architecture overview. So here we just compare basically a traditional CMS on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side we have the Headless CMS. So you can see that here basically the content comes in by the authors, and here we have one web server, or basically one monolithic application, which is also providing you the authoring interface and the admin UI, and also the front end to the public audience. And then these are served through through the same web server. So you have to install actually some part of the CMS to make it work on the content delivery as well. And then this is serving the content, or actually the HTML, to the different devices. So comparing to the Headless, the main difference is that it's actually in Sitecore, where the authoring part is still, you have to have a Windows server, and it's basically running the same old Sitecore CM instance, or actually the XP instance. And but for the actual front end, what is visible for the public is served by different client applications, and one of them could be the Next.js application. But here you can basically have any kind of iOS application or Android or whatever, which can communicate through APIs on internet. So yeah, that's really just a short overview, because I think you already heard a lot about what is Headless. So let's dive into the Sitecore Headless services. So this is the backend part of the Headless inside Sitecore. One important part is actually the layout service. This is an API endpoint which is serving the JSON response for a page. So it's actually including all the informations, all the component informations and placeholders and everything in this JSON response. But in general, the JSON response is of course better than HTML, because it can be easily processed by basically any kind of programming language. So here I just have an example of the layout service response. I will show the different parts of it. So on the first part, we have some global data about our Sitecore context, basically. So you can see the item paths, the language, the page state, which can be editing or normal or preview, and some other basic information about the context of the request. And then the next part is the root. The root means actually the data on page level. So here we have the page name, or actually the item name of the page. And here I have just one example, a page title, which is a field on the page item. And here are some other information like layout ID, template, and so on. And then the last part, which is missing, is actually the rendering part. So here, if we check on the top, we have it's called placeholders, and inside the placeholders, actually we have the layout in the JSON format. So first we have a JSS main placeholder. This is our root placeholder, and then inside that I have an array, so a list of components. And here I have just basically just a container with the layout. And then inside that, I have the JSS header and the JSS content placeholder. And this can also contain several components. In this example, I only have one in the JSS header and one in the JSS content. So if I zoom out, these could be, for example, a page. So here is the header part, and here is the content. So yeah, that's about the layout service. And you may ask how you can, or how this actual JSON response is put together by Sitecore. And one of the key components of it is content resolvers. So this is basically it's telling to the rendering, or to the rendering item on a page what kind of content needs to be included. So if I go back, for example, to resolve this component and its field, I had to use the data source content resolver. So what it does, it just basically resolves the data source of this component and then passing it into the field property. But we have the ability to write our own custom content resolvers. So we can basically put any kind of data in it, even from different systems if we want, or if we need some special logic for the content on the backend, we can put it in. So we can write our own content resolvers, and there are some built-in resolvers, for example, the context item resolver or its children resolver, and same for data source and some others. So usually these are covering most of the components, but in some cases you could build your own. So let's talk a bit about the infrastructure. Let me just drink. So this is a really simple example of a Sitecore XP or XM installation. We have a database server, we have a Sitecore content management, and the content delivery. So this is the old one. Of course, it can be more complicated, but the basic roles are these. And with NextJS coming in, there is this new part, which is basically we have a NextJS application connected to the Sitecore content management server, and we have another one which is connected to the delivery server. Theoretically, you can also have one NextJS application connected to the CM and CD. That could also work, but in I think most of the cases, for example, content management servers are behind private networks, so it has some restricted firewall and things like that, so it can't just simply access to other applications outside of the network. So in this case, it's a good choice to have a dedicated NextJS application for the content management server. And the good thing also about this one that if you want to have features switch on or off based on content management or content delivery server, you can do that because, for example, on a Next.js, so if the Next.js application contains an authentication for some reason, because the users has to log in to view the content, for the content management server, we just want to switch this off and access any content to the content editors. So in this case, we just had a configuration in the Next.js application, and with this flag, we could just switch on and off this feature. So I think that's a good approach to build your infrastructure with Next.js and Sitecore. So let's dive into a bit what Sitecore provides us for the Next.js framework. So first, let's clarify what is Next.js. So basically, Next.js, what the company says for implementing it, is the React framework for production. So it was built on React, but it contains a lot more. And what I want to emphasize here is the rendering methods. So basically, with Next.js, you got a server-side framework and also a client-side framework, and you can use the same language. The only difference is where is the actual code is running. And this rendering methods means actually how the Next.js app would render in the browser the actual content and the HTML. And for that, we have 4 choices. First one is the server-side rendering. Is really it's really the same as the Sitecore MVC. So the actual HTML which the user can see in the browser is rendered on the server side on request time. This is really important because when we go to the next one, to the static site generation, that means the HTML is again created on the server, but it's not on request time. It's actually generated on publish time. So for example, if I change the content, then the static site is regenerating itself before any request. And when the user wants to see a page, the actual server just has to provide the HTML without any logic inside. So the next one then is the client-side rendering. So it's that the actual HTML is not rendered on the server side, it's rendered in the browser. So here we have some API calls to get the content, and the actual DOM changes and putting together the HTML is running on the client side. And this is what is React for. And the incremental static generation is actually really similar than the static site generation. The difference here is that it's basically just incrementally generating the sites. So let's go to the next topic, which is we have basically different kind of features in the Next.js SDK, and these are the ones. So the first one is the actual component factory. So the component factory, you can really think of it as a factory. It's holding all the components, for example, a header or a text component or image component or whatever. and this is actually holding which component is paired to which rendering item inside Sitecore. So this is a key part of the of resolving the actual HTML. Next one is the placeholder resolver. So inside the components, we could have placeholders, and the placeholders has to resolve their components as well. We also have the placeholder resolver in the MVC world when we just use the HTML extension placeholder method. And we also have field helper components. These are actually helping to accelerate development by giving you, for example, a text field and an image field, which automatically rendering all the attributes which is coming from Sitecore. So for example, if we have a link in Sitecore which has an alt text, not an alt text, a description and the link to go, that can be edited in Sitecore, and those attributes which are edited can be automatically resolved by the field helper component. And using field helper component is also supporting experience editor. So this is I also advise to use. The next part is actually the fetching the layout service data and mapping it to TypeScript objects and make it work with the component factory. And yeah, this framework is also supporting multi-language solutions. What is important here is when you have multi-language, you have to set up the language in Sitecore, like in the old way, adding new language. But you also have to add to a configuration inside the Next.js application, because Next.js application doesn't know all the languages which Sitecore provides from one request. Sitecore Analytics and Experience Editor has also full support. So you get actually the same features like from an MVC project. And this is really useful, and we used it a lot, is actually this connected mode. This is used mostly by front-end developers, for example, who has a Macintosh and doesn't have Sitecore installed on his machine. Then basically he can run a mock of a layout service and actual item structure and page structure and behave like a Sitecore database and the Sitecore content delivery server. And then the front-end developer can work fully disconnected from Sitecore. And if he has to do any changes on the content or adding a new component to a page, they can just do it in a YAML file, which is the source for the mock, and that's it. And then they can just commit the changes and go for the next feature. So that was all about all of the general stuff about Sitecore and Headless and Next.js. So now I just share our story with our first Headless project. So the project started, of course, with requirements and with given deadlines. So we had to really plan these few months with our company. So yeah, so one of the requirements was that we have to finish in a really short time frame, which is, I mean, it of course depends on the implementation. But for this kind of application, I think 7-8 months was pretty short, and we didn't really have a big team. But let's talk about it later. And yeah, so the client already had an existing Sitecore MVC implementation, and also development was going on with that. And we were doing this another site with Headless, and yeah, so we had to use, or we could actually already use the infrastructure and everything which was there, and also the Sitecore .NET implementation. And what we had to do is actually add our Next.js application to the infrastructure, and of course configure Sitecore to use Headless on this site. So we were actually the first one at this client with Next.js and with this whole Headless approach. And about the project domain, it was more like a booking system. So it was a system about to book different activities in parks. So, for example, I want to book for, I don't know, Tuesday morning, a tennis class or a tennis court, or I want to go to mini golf or things like that. And at this point, it turned out it's more like a single page application. So it's more like really an app where you book and not like reading and requesting content. So that's a really important aspect of it. And yeah, we also had to integrate the NextJS application and Sitecore with different existing services, for example, for booking, payment, and for product information. So these were the initial, let's say, requirements. And for that, of course, we did some estimation and we put together the team. And this is the team. So we had 2 senior front-end developers who had experience a bit of Next.js, but much more on React. We had a senior Node.js developer who was actually, it was not related to the Sitecore itself, but it was related to the project. So he was working on different new APIs to integrate into the Next.js application. And we had 2 senior Sitecore developers. One of them was me, and we had 1 tech lead who was focusing mostly on infrastructure and DevOps. So as you can see, we had a pretty small team, but with a lot of experts. So everyone actually was an expert on his own field. So that this is what we had to be secure with the implementation, because what we have to do now, if we have all the knowledge, is basically communicating to each other. So how we started the project when we had the team to put together. So after discovering the initial requirements, it turned out that the layout and the content won't be changed that much. So this means the actual front-end business logic has a higher priority than the actual content editing experience, and to make it fully editable and split that to different components in Experience Editor. So that's why we choose to actually have quite big components, because there was a quite strict design as well for us. So the design wasn't on component level, it was more like on page level. And that's why we chose big components, but these components later could be split to smaller ones. And this really helped with the implementation. And also it helps to decreasing the layout errors and the content errors. So if it's limited, then editors can take less mistakes. And later, that's what I said exactly. So this was an MVP. I am not sure if I mentioned that, but it was an MVP. So really put together what we need on this project. So nothing really marketing related. It was really just to implement the core functionality of this application. So in we call it 0 sprint because it's not actual feature development yet. So we just prepared for the first sprint. So what we had to do is actually first a Sitecore upgrade, because the Next.js SDK is only supported from Sitecore 10.2. And it was an easy one actually, because the actual infrastructure was already using Kubernetes, so it was easy just to update the images and the project basically. So we could solve it, I think, in a 1 or 2 week. Oops, let's go back. So then the next topic was to find out how we want to develop, because actually we had 3 teams, and the 3 teams would work together on the same feature, and actually the Next.js developer and the team was depending on the Sitecore part and also on the new APIs which are implemented. So that's why we found out that, okay, we have to find a way to communicate and document everything, and basically to have some contracts between the teams, what they are expecting and what we are giving them. For example, for an API, we use the Open API specification, and for Sitecore templates and components and pages, we use the Sitecore YAML mocks. And we, as Sitecore developers, we actually was working first. We worked on Sitecore and put together the templates and pages and renderings and everything. And then we did the same, or actually at that time, the front-end developer was already doing its own work, but with YAMLs. And we always, we of course had to help them a little bit because they were not familiar with Sitecore that much. So sometimes we just jumped in and changed those Sitecore YAML mocks. And in the sprint, we also had to decide what kind of rendering methods we want to use. And we decided on to use server-side rendering. In our case, we couldn't use a static site generation, and because our pages were just too dynamic, and we didn't want to use client-side dynamics because we wanted to have the server side of it, and that's why we choose the server-side rendering, which is kind of similar, like for a .NET web project. So after we set up everything and we had the Sitecore upgraded, we started to work. So the front-end development was going on, the back-end development as well, and the Sitecore development as well. Also on the Sitecore side, we had to implement some content resolvers and some integration with Content Hub on the content management server side. But in this meantime, we were also learning Next.js and the front end a bit because we teached each other, and every team. We actually had every week 1 hour or 1.5 hour alignment with the full dev team where we could discuss anything we want. It could be a feature or it could be, I don't know, something architectural decision we had to do. So that was really useful. So in this sixth sprint, actually the development was going on, but we couldn't bound together the features. So at the end of the sixth sprint, we finally bound together and integrate together everything. So the Next.js application was not using mocks anymore, but connected to real APIs and real Sitecore. And that was also crucial to use the mocks because then on the review meetings, so we were in Scrum, and every second week we had a demo to the client. And if we wouldn't have any mocks, it was hard to show anything to the client because basically what we do in the background in this after this sixth sprint, we just bound together, but the application was behaving the same and everything, just the content source was different. So it was not a big surprise for the client after sixth sprint. Of course, when we bind together features, then we had to do a real QA because until this point, basically a feature was not done because there was too many dependencies. So the QA was followed by the sixth sprint and then the UAT. So the critical, so this was I was talking about, sorry. So in the 7-8 sprint, we put together the features and then send basically most of the core functionality of the website to QA. And then, we had the QA, and there was, of course, a lot of bugs and edge cases we didn't talk or taught because we were really focusing on the positive part to go through a booking, a full payment with the checkout and everything. And in this fourth sprint, basically we were fixing minor bugs, working on go to production and so on. But in the last 2 sprints, we actually had an audit from the security point of view and also from the performance point of view. And here I want to tell something about caching on the Node.js side. So in Next.js, we don't really have a memory where we want to cache, or actually in cloud, we don't really want to cache anything in a memory. So that's why we chose Redis for caching. And because the APIs which we had to use were some legacy systems, and we didn't really had any chance to optimize those. So there were actually API calls which took like 10 seconds for the login and things like that. So it was a huge issue. So we had to think about it. And what we did is actually caching like hell. So caching every API response what we can for these legacy systems, and with a really short time to leave. So it was, for us, it was 5 minutes because it was good enough for the business, but still the application was fast. And for that, we actually used Node-Redis. This is a package, and this is really useful and really easy to integrate on the server side. Yeah, so basically that was the end of the project, and then we went live. And I want to show you a bit about our infrastructure because I think it was also interesting. So what we had is actually, let's go back here. So here we have the Sitecore environment with the content management server and content delivery. It was running on Azure Kubernetes services. And we were thinking about to put in also in Kubernetes the front-end application. But just for simplicity, what we did is we used actually app services. And these are Linux-based, basically Docker images, which is run by an app service. And here we have 2. So one is for the CM and one for the content delivery. And here we have the content delivery with Redis cache. And yeah, here are some parts, but this is not really important. I just want to show you this connection, and that you can also run Next.js in Azure. Also, I want to say that if you have the chance, you have better to host in Vercel because you have more support for Next.js in Vercel. So, but we had to use Azure because it was hosted by the client, so it was a requirement. And whoa, I went too far. And yes, just some learnings at the end. So I think what is cool about Next.js and Sitecore Headless is that every team is really comfortable with its own technology and can use it. So they can use React and Next.js, and they don't have to dive into HTML files and writing some weird JavaScript and jQuery and things like that. So they can use a really comfortable framework for development. Yeah, so I didn't mention GraphQL because in this project we didn't use. Actually, there was a simple reason because we were just too afraid to dive also into GraphQL. We know that with the layout service and with the way we found out it will work. So, and GraphQL was too new for us, but we had already too many new stuff. So like Sitecore Headless and Next.js, and we didn't want to put in another risk. But this is definitely another path and a good choice for the future. More importantly, if you want to move to XM Cloud, there you have GraphQL. So this is definitely something which we want to adapt on our next project. So yeah, and again, the effective communication, I already talked about it. And one issue I want to show, and where we had, I don't know, we had to dive into and troubleshoot for days, was the experience editor. So the experience editor is actually supported, and it's really easy to set up in a local environment. But once you have like authentication and integration with third-party services, it's hard. It's because you have to switch off stuff based on the role of the Next.js application, and also the network has really counts, because I will just show you how the experience editor works with Next.js, and I hope it will get clear. So what we have here is, on the left side, we have the content management server, is a Sitecore .NET based server, and on the right side we have the Next.js app. And when you open Experience Editor, this is what's happening. So there is actually a post request to the Next.js application. There is an API for this, which is actually calling a middleware, and then it's actually resolving all the placeholders, all the components, and resolving all the fields. So what you get is you get back basically the content with the HTML, and then this is what's rendered inside the content management server. And if you use placeholders and field helpers, then the extra HTML which is needed to work in Experience Editor to have inline editing and to be able to add placeholders renderings to the placeholders. These are all rendered by the Next.js application in this editing mode. Although I recommend to disable this endpoint on the content delivery, because you just simply don't need it. So this is how it works, and I think that's all. And yeah, just the last slide. This I am one of the organizers of SUG Europe, and if you didn't hear yet about it, then just reach out and see the page, and see you in Malaga, hopefully. And that was it. If you have any questions, I am happy to answer now, or if later, you can reach out to me.
Okay, Thomas. Do you have any questions, or?
I have one. This is Eli from RightPoint. For the resolvers, what did you find that with out-of-the-box resolvers that you needed to create custom ones, and what were like some of the use cases for needing them? Okay,
good question. So we had to do one actually. I believe it was to resolve wildcard items from a different part of the content tree structure than the actual page item. So we was dynamically resolving by ID some product items basically from Sitecore, and the layout was always the same. I also blogged about this, so if you are curious about the solution, that's also on my blog.
Great, I would love to take a look at it. Thanks for posting it.
Thank you for the question.
I might have a question around the Azure hosting with the web apps, like the Node app, which is something most of the clients hesitate, like to, even at least I ran into a situation where they didn't want to sign up with Vercel, since they already have a huge Azure presence and it's already there in place. What are the, I know you talked through this, but is there anything that was very much like, oh, this is so painful to do with Azure web apps, it could have been much easier situation?
Actually, what was easy using the web app with the Docker image is that we could deploy the same Docker image as we had locally. So there was nothing magic happening there. It was just really hosting our Docker image there, and we could scale that. And it was working pretty fine with the production environment as well, where we had like, okay, it's not much visitors, but like a few thousand visitors per day.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But by deploying it, nothing was, I don't remember anything. Maybe with the configuration, but I wasn't really working on that part because of the Linux container.
Okay. And did you add Azure CDN to that mix, or you did not?
No, we didn't have.
Okay.
There was a Cloudflare before that. So
yeah.
No, okay, yeah. Okay. But I'm not sure if Cloudflare was used as a CDN. I don't think.
Yeah. Okay. It was just doing the more like the WAF firewall kind of.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Tamás. I don't have a question, but then it was a really fruitful session. I'm hoping to try out the Next.js sometime soon. I'll check out your blog as well.
Yeah, give it a try. I mean, it's really nice. If you have someone maybe who knows React, that helps a lot, because most of them, which was strange for me, it was more like React related and not Next.js. So
Gotcha. Like I have a project which is using the JSs, like it's a huge project, but then I wasn't involved when it was developed. I just joined recently, and we have the React developers. There is like a whole bunch of front-end team, and we are the back-end team. So as a back-end developer, you just like build the component, and as long as the results are producing in Postman, you are like, fine, here are the props, everything is coming up, here you go. Like, so
so definitely. But sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, so that's why I don't know like how the front end was set up, how the Next.js React components are set up. It's just like I wish I was part of the project when it was developing, but it's all developed. So we are just maintaining the project with migrating some Sitecore 8 to 9 content and introducing some new features and all.
I see.
Yeah. But
that really helps if because I didn't do any React course or anything. I was just really learning from our front end team. So I have I have on my list some great courses for free. I can share with you again.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I found some of the LinkedIn learning for React to actually be really beneficial when I started doing that, and then I just jumped right into the Sitecore Next.js walkthrough with Docker. That gives you a good overview of really how the components are scaffolded based on what Tamás said about the diagrams of the rendering engine, layout service, and the SDK.
Gotcha.
One other question related to I believe you mentioned you are going with the SSR stuff. SSR, and was there a reason that you did not use SSG, or was it more like a client requirement that it's more dynamic data and you want to stick to SSR?
Yeah, exactly. It was too dynamic. So basically every user had different content to see based on the API calls and everything. So because it was not personalization, it was more like a business logic we had to put in the APIs.
Okay.
Exactly, that was the reason. And we also put actually some pretty good effort on the server side of the Next.js to implement our own APIs on the Next.js.
At the node level, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
This is Ben again. Was there a need to do any type of shared state, such as like a Redux toolkit with SSR, or were you able to get away with sharing component state at like a child-parent relationship.
Yeah, we didn't have to use that state component, I believe, but I am not the front-end expert. I just try to remember. We had some forms, but it was all in.
Yeah, normally if you create like large enough components, you know, at a page level, you don't need to share state across components because they're all encapsulated.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so that, exactly, that was one of the points mentioned there. For example, if you have a form that just doesn't make sense to actually split it to each field to different components, because that's just too much.
Yep, timeline too.
Okay. Any other questions, anyone?
Did you use Storybook?
In the beginning, yes, and then we dropped it, I think, because
was there a reason for that?
Yeah, I think because of the Sitecore model we had and mocks we had to follow. I believe it was just too many mocks we had to do, I believe.
Okay.
But I'm also not sure why we dropped it. Yeah, we had a pretty time pressure, so we were more focusing on the delivering the components. Did you use Storybook, Ben?
Yeah, starting to use it more. You know, you're able to generate the layout data, so you can have like a page mapping of your Sitecore pages, whether it's on a local instance or a developer instance. You can make, you know, GraphQL or REST service requests to those pages, and then you can generate Storybook templates for all of those pages and automatically insert the components that are on those pages inside Storybook. So that's I don't think people have shared that yet, because I'm not sure if anyone has done it. I can certainly share a blog post on it.
Cool, that would be great. I
think overall, I mean, even if you don't use Storybook for the components, or you use it initially because your front end team is not able to do a Sitecore first approach, you can at least get used to scaffolding your grid, your responsiveness, your theming, and getting it set up there first, and then you can kind of connect Sitecore too if you need to.
Yeah, makes sense.